right, so if you're still struggling with the topic here on sodomy laws, this will address some of the issues. So, sodomy laws, do they still matter today? As you see here, I did this search in 2020. Let's see what shows up when we do a search here. Sodomy laws, Jamaica on the right. So, we still see a couple of, there you go, false criminal sodomy charges against 36. It's Topeka, Kansas. Anyway, so that's the reason why I did it just show some connection to today. So we should already have an understanding that this is a biblical reference to Sodom and Gomorrah. So feel free to do a search where you could look at some of the specifics here, as this is not a class on religion. The question here is, should individuals accused of violating sex crimes be classified as sex offenders? So the first thing we want to take note of what exactly does this mean as far as a sex crime is concerned. And now we are going to transition to the magazine One. So if you recall, Mattachine Society, there's a magazine that they're publishing called One, and One addresses issues impacting the gay male community in the 1950s going into the 1960s. So they're looking at this particular question here. As you could see, the press against the sex maniac, where they're starting to look at things like sexual deviancy, criminal sexual deviancy, and I would say that sodomy laws fit within that particular category. So in this particular section is a reference to a story. It's asking the question, is the child a sex deviant? So in this particular case, the neighbors are charging a boy as a sex offender. He is only 7 years old. He was taken into custody and held in a juvenile hall. And here's the complaint right here. He committed a lewd act. Notice the use of the word lewd, which has been used to target the gay community in the 50s going into the 70s. And the issue here is he is placing his hand under a girl's dress. So the point here is that if the Mattachine Society, again, they are looking at the question of sexual deviancy. And so the reason why they want to address this issue here is if the courts and if the society is going to suggest that this individual is engaging in lewd behavior, and one thing we're pointing out here is this is between a male and a female. So if this particular act is of sexual deviancy or curiosity, then what impact could this case have on homosexuals engaging in what society is going to suggest is lewd sexual deviancy as well? So we also know that the Mattachine Society writes about sodomy extensively in some of their magazines that they publish. And you can see some of the references. And all these are just excerpts from the Mattachine Society One. Here they're looking at the sexual activity, the reproduction of children, which was an issue that we have addressed as far as man and woman engaging in a sex act with the intent of producing a child. That is reproduction, which, keep in mind, two men or two women engaging in a comparable sex act could never produce that. And that seems to be one of the issues of concern for society. Notice here how they're addressing the Kinsey report. So again, these are just excerpts from Mattachine Society 1. And here you see some of the specifics with regard to one of the laws that they're citing. Notice how they're looking at the age of the child. And once again, the age of the child coming into question with regard to the sodomy laws. Here we see yet another sodomy law that is looking at, and again, this is about sexual deviancy. Here they're talking about any sort of act that is engaged with an animal, bird, or dead body. If this is going to be sexual deviancy, then you are saying that any homosexual act is on the same level. And that seems to be the issue of concern when we're looking at sodomy laws, specifically when we're looking at laws that are targeting homosexuals through this vague, lewd lens. So anyway, some of the specifics here, just looking at a couple of cases. Here we see Doe versus Commonwealth Attorney. So ultimately, what's going on here is they're challenging some of the sodomy laws that are in place. And here we see the Code of Virginia. So this is the law here. Notice how they use the language. It's a crime against nature. Um, if any person carnally knows in any manner. So what they're saying here is that the individual has the intent of engaging in any sort of act that is going to yield some sort of sexual gratification. And now they get into some of the specifics with regard to what those acts can look like. And here they kind of mention that. And here they mention some of the specifics. So keep in mind what this law is doing here is looking at, and identifying sexual acts that would fit as far as a violation of this language, crime against nature. And sodomy laws do fit within that particular area, according to the society of this particular time that we're looking at here. So here we see this particular case, some of the specifics. States are breaking down felonies, violent crimes. So ultimately, the question here is whether or not any sort of person accused of violating a sodomy law is actually doing anything that is against the law. So in this particular case, they're challenging the legislation, and here we see the outcome of this particular case. They're arguing that even if the act is committed in the home, so what are we talking about? We're talking about the sexual act involving a man with a man in a sexual act, even if it is committed in the home, as they mentioned here. They're saying that the state is within its right to determine punishment. And the end goal is that it's to promote morality and decency. So that would tell us that two men engaging in a sexual act is not moral and is not decent. Let's move on to the next case here. We're going to be moving on. So here we see the reaction from some of the gay rights activists, and they're going to challenge that particular argument. And here are three challenges that they come up with regard to why the ruling against in favor of the states for the sodomy law is actually incorrect. So they're arguing here that the decision is going to impact more heterosexuals. Decision affected more heterosexuals than homosexuals. What they're arguing here is that so we have this language of lewd, these sodomy laws, and the question is, can a man and a woman engage in comparable acts? Notice that the law did identify some of the sexual acts. So if the man and the woman engage in this, and even if they're married, would they be in violation? So what she is arguing here is that the law as written is definitely going to find more heterosexual couples, committing a violation against the law. Yet for some reason, the only people that the states are enforcing these laws are against two men. So there's an equity there. What is the intent of the law? Here they're arguing that 60% of heterosexuals engage in those particular acts. So that's kind of the point, that the laws are unfairly targeting gay men, which brings up the case of Bowers Hardwick. So here we see the image of Hardwick on the left. So the police are arriving at his residence, and they are looking for this individual to arrest him. So as they're looking for the individual in question, this man right here, the police hear some commotion in the room. They take a look in the room, and they find Mr. Hardwick engaging in an act of sodomy, which violates the Georgia sodomy law. Now, keep in mind that the cops are not there to enforce the sodomy law. They're not sending police, but they do catch this individual violating the law. So this goes to the Supreme Court. And here we see the ruling from the Supreme Court, which is questioning the right to privacy. It does not confer the right upon homosexuals to engage in sodomy. The right to privacy protects intimate aspects of marriage. So here they're saying that the right to privacy is only between man and woman in marriage. So if a man and woman were, engaging in that act and the police did see them through the door, these individuals would be able to argue that they have a right to privacy and that the police overstepped. This does not apply to gay men. the situation in question here. It says clearly it does not protect gay sodomy because there is no connection between family, marriage, or procreation. So the two men engaging that act, not being married, you can watch these individuals and they cannot argue right to privacy because the acts that they are engaging in are not any of the items that are addressed here. You're not doing that act for procreation. You're not doing it for marriage. We don't even recognize marriage, and there's no connection to family. So the only people protected for right to privacy would be individuals falling in that particular category. Here we have yet another case, Lawrence, Texas. This one kind of brings up the issue of race. I just used some made up photographs here, so apologize. So we have three individuals that are hanging out at an apartment, and two of the individuals are in a relationship. So if you could follow kind of the progression here, we have a white male with two black males, and these two individuals have a past, and these two right here are engaged in a relationship. So in this particular story, it's getting late, and I know you don't have a ride home. Prepare to stay the night. So he's suggesting to this individual, why don't you stay the night? And this individual says he is going to leave, which is precisely what happens. He leaves. He knows that they are into each other and decides that he is going to call the police and talk about the fact that there is a crazy black man with a gun at the apartment. The police are going to show up, and very similar to the prior case, they're looking for the gun. They see a door, they look in the door, and they see the individuals engaging in a sexual act. And this gets sent to the Supreme Court. And this is the case here where we see the courts ruling against the sodomy laws, where they're arguing that this sodomy laws are unconstitutional, and they overturn the conviction of Lawrence Garner. So looking at some of the other cases, all I did here is look up sodomy laws and get some of the text. Here we see some from Utah, kind of difficult to read. But what I want you to identify here is the use of some of the phrases that we've been looking at in class: the crime against nature, unnatural. When you see these words, it's going back to that point that two men, it's not natural according to society, and it seems to be a crime against nature. And we see some of the laws playing out very similar to some of the rape cases. We also see the issue here with regard to a relationship amongst the family. The question here is sodomy laws, lewd behavior. What does that actually mean? That seems to be the issue of concern. Here we see one from Massachusetts. Unnatural, lascivious. So here we're using gray area language that is debatable. And here they're setting up a punishment. We have a fine, imprisonment. So I don't necessarily know what these phrases mean, but I probably can identify them when I see them. So if it's a man kissing another man, that could be considered, one of these two items here. Further information, feel free to take a look at these clips here. And here are the questions you want to think about with regard to the sodomy laws.